Thank you for listening to this episode.
And follow the podcast on social media by finding @PrestigiouSPod. And if you'd like to be coached on how to live a more prestigious life, you can reach out to me, Chris Bean, at Chris Bean Official, or by emailing the podcast directly at prestigiousinitiative@gmail.com.
Lastly, sign up for our newsletter either through social media or on our website.
This is the Prestigious Initiative. Welcome. I'm Chris Bean. Today we have Dr. Tony Dice, a man whose life read like an action hero script with raw human and with a raw human second act. Navy SEAL, high functioning addict, PhD. He knows the dark side of success when it comes to that destructive part of it. Now Tony helps those who served reclaim their lives and rebuild from trauma to addiction. Rebuild from trauma and addiction. We're going to be diving into a slippery edge between excellence and self-destruction, and how real mastery is about healing and not just winning. Dr. Tony, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Chris. It's an honor to be here. Hope we can do some good.
And Tony, why would somebody want to listen to our conversation here today?
Well, there's two people I'd like to hear this message. One is the high functioning addict, alcoholic out there who is kicking ass, taking names, changing the world. No matter what anyone says to you today, you're not going to change your ways because it's all hitting, bang on. But in the back of your head, I want you to put this message to be used later. To the other person, the other guest or the other person listening to this, the other message I want to receive is for the high functioning addict, alcoholic who's beginning to hear the sound that an unbalanced life makes, the thumping under the hood, the check engine light clipping coming on, the something's amiss. This message today, I hope, will resonate with them as well.
Very good. Now, can you tell me about the earliest memory of chasing that adrenaline or winning? Was it part of your SEAL training journey, or was it something even earlier than that?
Oh, way much, much earlier. When I was a little kid, like really early in my life, my parents lived in San Diego. And down at Balboa Park, they have this old school carousel, like the horses going up and down, the music, and as a little kid, my mom told me about the brass ring. And, she said, if you get on one of the outside horses during the carousel ride, if you lean way out and you stretch out there as far as you can, they put out these little rings you can grab as you swing by, if you're lucky enough to catch it. And every once in a while, the metal ones will replace with one brass one. And if you get the brass ring, you get a free ride. So as a little kid, this was like, those who risk, those who try repeatedly, I'd get the metal rings, but every once in a while I got a brass ring and I would win, and you had to forego getting on the horses that went up and down. You couldn't ride in the middle. You had to ride on the outside, the riskiest horse, and you had to lean out and you had to make that effort. And that appealed to me at an early age that I want to get that brass ring. The epilogue to that story, and this is the addiction hook to it. I learned that the metal rings, if you kept them and you brought them home, because you're supposed to return them. If I kept them and brought them home, I could paint them brass in color. And the next time I went, I would pretend to reach and I would have a brass ring and get a free ride. And I learned to win by working the system, by cheating. That's how I fulfilled that addictive. I need to win every time. I need to figure out a way to always get this. And so I think that was the earliest kind of, of the awards, getting that hook, addicted to winning. I'm going to find a way, no matter if it violated moral or ethical codes. That was kind of like addiction seeking in at a very young age.
Now, okay, so that's a really interesting story. And what I'm reading from that is that you learned, and I'm sure this is a reoccurring theme for you. You consistently learn where the line is, and you do your best to walk right on that line. And every once in a while, you tiptoe over until somebody says something or otherwise, and then you have to go back on the right side of the line.
You nailed it, man. You nailed it. I mean, I learned that I had a high aversion to risk. I mean, high risk reward. I could bring it to the line. I learned that you could step over it if needed be, but above all, you got to get away with it, And so how to walk that line And in there, I found this a place where you would stand out, you would win more often, you would excel. People would go, "Whoa, you're amazing." There was a lot of uh, accolades to walking that space and getting away with it.
Now, does that also come with a, let's see, a unique ability to be able to think outside the box, to think in ways that others don't, and so much so that you are doing things that are not technically, quote unquote, against the rules, but after you do it, then they become against the rules.
Yeah, you are walking a line that it does two things. One, you have to be super creative to kind of always kind of defeat the systems and places to keep you in line. But the other side is, and this is the darker side, you constantly carry this feeling of, well, if I didn't cheat, I wouldn't have won. I'm the pretender syndrome that I don't really deserve to be here. You carry that your whole life, that imposter syndrome will follow you. And I remember early on kind of feeling that, but still the drive to win, succeed was kind of overshadowed that.
Right. Well, and then you get kind of addicted to that success. And
You need it to
yeah,
validate.
yeah. Right. And then
Yeah.
without that, then you're like, okay, well, I didn't do it right this time. And then you tried it again. And then it becomes almost a vicious cycle that you just continue doing things over and over and over again until you get that win.
It is, let's just say it's a combination of I'm willing to try 100 times behind the scenes where you don't see me to demonstrate in front of you that I'm a winner that one time.
Mm.
I will do the work, even if I have to cheat too, but I'm still going to do the work to win no matter what.
Now, how does that, or how did that kind of mentality play out for you in your life as you continued on?
Let's see. Let's see. That was, throughout my life, finding a way, and I would kind of describe it as falling through the cracks. Even going into like Buds training. You show up at Buds, and let me set the stage. There's 180 different applicants showing up for that Buds class, and every one of them is the big fish from their little pond. They're all like fucking stacked. They have their sunglasses on. They look the part. They all swear they're going to die before they quit. And statistically, 80% of these guys in the next couple of weeks are going to quit. And you're like, what's going to happen? And so it's a very like, I'm not sure what's going to happen. I'm going to go, but this is freaking scary. Oh, man. But in my mind, there was this, I figured out how to get through everything else. I'm going to figure this out too. And to an example, and I want you to take this example and times it by every day in Buds. So there was one part in second phase, dive phase, where it's called drown proofing. You have to do all these activities in the water with your hands tied behind your back and your feet tied together. So you're in the pool and you got to tread water for a while and you got to go across the pool and you got to retrieve a mask. There's all these things you have to do. And one of them, you have to float in one spot for 45 minutes with your hands and feet tied behind. I was super negative. I was very lean, and I would sink to the bottom instantly if I stopped moving. And so I had a lot of trouble floating. No matter how high I tried or how much I practiced, I couldn't get this hands tied behind your back, feet tied together, floating thing. And I'd be doing this little dolphin bob, trying to stay in one spot, and I could not float. Through trial and error, I figured out all I needed was about, 25 cc's of air, like a little bubble of air is all I needed to maintain that. And I was trying things like, can I swallow air ahead of time? What can I do trying to figure this out? I found that if I took almost like two water bottles of air, a water bottle of air, and put it between my legs, I could float. So what I did, I took a blood pressure cuff out of a blood pressure and I ripped it out and I sewed it and tied in the Speedo of my, inside the lining of my Speedo. So when I was trying out for drown proofing, the little inflation bulb of the blood pressure cuff, I would pretend like I was, scratching my junk and I would inflate it. So I'd have this little balloon of air between my legs. And that was enough for me to pass this evolution and get through that part of the training. So I made it through. I definitely wasn't, authentic, but somehow I passed that evolution by cheating. And, I for sure would have had hell to pay. I would have either, if I didn't get dropped for training, I would have been beaten to death by the instructors. for getting caught with this, but that was an example of me trying to figure out a way to get through this problem, which was buds.
Mm. What an interesting story. Uh, uh, did anybody in your group know that you were doing that?
I was not letting anyone know about
Sure.
that. This bulge between my legs and trying to keep it as low key as possible. But
Yeah.
somehow I made it.
Wow. Huh. Well, okay. So, okay. So there's two ways that you could look at that though, because like there's
Mm-hmm.
one way. Okay, yeah, you didn't get through the quote unquote right way. You cheated to do it. But the other way is you had some real ingenuity to be able to think outside the box, to come up with a creative solution, to be able to pass that test that you had to pass in order to move on.
Right.
And so much so that you did it with everybody watching you. So it was not obvious that you were doing anything, and you used the tools that you had at your disposal in order to overcome that challenge that you had.
You sound like the little voice in my head who was justifying and rationalizing me doing this. That's what you sound like. But the ethos of buds, the things they were programming us with, they'd say on the regular, if you're not cheating, you're not trying. They would say that. But when you got in trouble, they would say, we're not punishing you for what you did. We're punishing you for getting caught.
Ah.
And so that was the programming going in. It was almost like, hey,
they were enabling
this is real
you.
life. This is real life. When you're out in the real world, there's like the people who accomplish the mission and the dead guys. Which one you want to be?
Mm. Yeah. Then you were just living up and doing things within the realm of understandable and possibility within the set of rules that you were given.
I love that mentality. And I think I was drawn to that population. When I checked in the SEAL Team 2, above the Master of Arms cage was written, engraved for all to see, admit nothing, deny everything, make counter accusations. I saw that and I was like, oh, I found my people. It's like the borderline. We want people with an ambiguous ethical code of conduct to come and do violence on our behalf. And I was like, yes, sign me up.
Now, okay, so then that's the kind of benefit to that. You were able to make it through SEALs, and I'm sure that type of skill benefited you in tons of other ways. But how about the downside of that? Like, walk me through a moment that you realized that you were in too deep, and this craze to succeed and to win took over.
Gosh, there are several moments like that, and like I said before, that imposter syndrome follows you. It follows you into training. If you knew all the corners I'd cut to be here, how I don't really deserve to be here, and so that veil of secrecy you carry with you. No one's truly knows you or lets you all the way in. And it's almost like this is my subconscious. This is how I greet everyone. Mm-hmm. You're all at arm's distance away, so you kind of lead a closed off life, and I think a lot of high performers kind of lead this closed off life where no one truly knows all the secrets. That's for me to know. So going through training, going through the teams, all of that, I carried this kind of, if you really knew, you wouldn't be, as tight as you think we are. And so I was just shakiness, and it was a bravado I carried. And, for the most part, I was a hard charger in the team that had a good reputation. I love the guys. I love the way that alcohol worked in the military. It was like an emotional currency, that you use alcohol to indoctrinate, you alcohol to celebrate, you need doctor to elevate, you need to separate. It's everything. If you have a hard day, this will solve it. You lost a brother in combat, let's get a bottle and work this out. You're fighting with someone, let's sit down and get a drink together. I love that. And that feeling, that sense of not belonging, this solved that problem. You and I can be close by sitting down and drinking, and all of a sudden we had this sense of connection that wasn't authentic, but it felt freaking good when you're drinking. So that became my enabler. I always carried a flask. If I didn't know what to say, I'd bust out the flask and say, hey, buddy, here you go. It became my love language, if that's a thing. And that worked. And that was what carried me through the teams. And I developed a very healthy addiction to drinking, which I'm sure a lot of guys did. I was still high functioning. And I also want to point out, this was all happening pre 9/11. And if you're a SEAL hungry for action, this is a very boring time to be a SEAL. And if you don't give these type of high performers a game to play, we're going to go find our own games to play and start getting into mischief. And I could see the writing on the wall. I had a series of things, that were just, stealing the flag off the top of Gibraltar, or, there's all these misadventures I go on that were close calls. And I could see the writing on the wall that one of these days something bad was going to happen and I was going to get, kicked out or something worse. And so I decided, I'm not going to continue. I'm going to get out of the SEAL teams. And that was, I think, of all the decisions I made, I did not know 9/11 was right around the corner. So that would have changed everything. But there was I was smart enough to see the writing on the wall that my way I was operating, it was just a matter of time before Murphy's Law caught up with me. I was going to screw up big, either by, experimenting with coke on the weekends, going to dancing on ecstasy all night, and then you busted on a piss test, or just one of these misadventures going sideways. So I punched out of the military. And I think that was the embodiment of maybe I didn't belong here anyways. Let's get out unscathed. Let's get away with it, basically.
All right. So a couple questions for that. You talked there
Sure.
about your subconscious being, on guard the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
Has there been a time now that you have been able to process that imposter syndrome, as it connects to the subconscious? And if so, what does that look like for you?
Gosh, it's a great question. And I talk about this all the time. For those of you who can't see us right now, my fists are clenched. I'm brought up almost in a fighting stance, and this is my subconscious. This is me. And if you want to connect with someone truly, this is not the position that's welcoming and connecting worthy. And look at this. My arms are kind of bending down reluctantly, trying to straighten them out in front of me in this open stance. I do not feel comfortable at all. I mean, I can't wait to get back to here in my fighting stance. But this open place, this place of being authentic and real and connection worthy, is a place that I had to get to. And that's the place that authenticity lies. That's a place that I was able to find only in recovery, only in finally learning how to trust again and open up. And there was this one therapist who got to me in treatment, and it blew my mind. Like, once getting through early recovery and looking back at what he did with just a cup of coffee. My whole life, I was a paramedic, firefighter, Navy SEAL, turnouts, M4s, kit bags, gurneys, all this shit I would use to save the day. That motherfucker walked in with a cup of coffee and saved my ass. That process that we engaged in, that kind of authentic, real, that was finally letting down my guard. That, to me, reflecting back, was like, holy shit, that guy's the badass. That guy fucking saved me from myself. That guy. As that was kind of the genesis of why I went back to school. Why I want to be that guy's the superhero, the rock star. And that was a hard trajectory for me to find, because being a therapist was nowhere on my radar. I mean, of all the places in the world I wanted to go, that was nowhere visible. So that was an eye-opening experience, almost like a reckoning for me.
Well, okay, so the other thing that I think was very interesting is I remember reading about Vietnam vets that when they were in Vietnam, because of the things they were seeing, the things they were doing, they were addicted to heroin and to coke and all kinds of other drugs, just to deal with what life was like over there. And heroin, to underline, heroin is one of the most addictive substances that to quit that is really, really challenging to do. But when they came back to stateside, they were able to quit cold turkey because of the culture difference. It was such the things they were seeing and things they were doing was vastly different from what it was like at home. And because of that, they were able to quit, and it was not a laborious process for them. They were done because of the difference. So with that kind of connection, then when you stepped away from the military, when you got out of the SEALs, did that same kind of mentality, was it still present until you had that therapy session, or was it subdued?
And I'm familiar with the studies you're talking about. And I wasn't averse to the idea that, I can't continue drinking this way my whole life, And a lot of people, like when they get out of the military, they turn it off. And if you look at your time in the service, everyone in the service drinks a lot. It's part of the tradition, the culture. I love that about that. And if you look at the populations of a whole, roughly only 20% of the populations are addicts and alcoholics. The rest of, way more than 20% drink in the military. There's this huge, I would say it's almost reverse. 80% of the military drinks alcohol. When they get out, does the addiction follow them? Is that become their new coping skill that follows them into the civilian sector? So I fully believe many of the service members who used drugs to cope in Vietnam who came back were not addicts and alcoholics. They had other coping skills they could employ in the civilian sector. They had a family. They didn't have this presupposition to to addiction that many of the people who did come back who continued to use. And there's I think we need to really grasp on there's more than one way to use. There's drugs, alcohol, there's a workaholic, there's someone who I came back several times, like when I got out of the military or when I come back from taking a contractor, like a mercenary gig where I go over for money and come back. I did that for many years, where I'd come back to the States and it felt so uncomfortable over here. I would be all keyed up and I know there was no threat, but I felt crazy because I thought there was a threat. That my solution was either to get drunk or high or redeploy because I felt sane over there. So that became my drug, was going back into the shit. That was my drug and using again. Coming back to the States, I had to find something to use. I could go into work and go into work, or I can go into alcohol. I had to have something to cope. And so that's where the addiction takes its many forms. And it can be very sinister because a workaholic is often praised as this amazing person who gets stuff done. It's a very hard addiction to wrap your head around. While the high functioning addict and alcoholic who is using these other coping skills also gets a lot done. So it's pretty sinister in the way addiction works. And so I think if we truly as a society looked at addiction in a much broader lens, addiction is anything in your life in which you obsess and compulse over that causes chaos in other parts of your life. That may be what you're addicted to. Work, love life, chemical addiction, behavioral addiction, gambling. There's a number of things that could cause chaos in our lives. So that might change our lens of how we view addiction as a society.
Well, and okay, so that's super, super helpful. And I think that on top of that kind of redefining or properly defining what addiction is, it seems like when you have that type of addictive personality or that addictive of part to you, that it's not as easy or even possible just to cut that off, but it almost like that energy, let's say, has to flow. Energy is maybe a weird term, but you have to flow somewhere else in order to kind of overlap what that addiction is. Is that kind of right?
Yeah. Say that first part again, because I kind of.
So with that kind of redefining of what addiction is, we can't like cut off where that addiction, that connection is going to, that energy is going to. So we have to replace it with something else because that energy is still there. We just, instead of it flowing into, or again, energy is a weird term for this, but instead of that attention flowing there or that time, energy, and effort going there, I need to find somewhere else that's actually helpful or beneficial or have a way to disperse it amongst a couple of different things.
You're right, hitting a nail right on the head. And the root of all this I found for myself and those I work with is that there's something wrong in here, and through my life path, I have developed a means of coping with it by changing my feelings on the inside through something on the outside. Whether it be praise at work, whether it be alcohol, whether it be winning at the slots, something I use from the outside to change how I feel on the inside. So this process that can be satisfied in many ways, but it requires an outside stimulus. When in recovery, or whatever form of recovery you find, you begin to learn that but there's an interior way to change these feelings. There's something that's more I can assess, I can work from inward out, and I don't require this constant outside conditioning or pleasing from the outside. So that's where that shift takes place, where that obsessive compulsive need to make myself feel differently from the outside gets satisfied by the inside.
And so you shift from external coping measures to internal coping measures.
Exactly. And that's kind of, if you look at a 12-step recovery program, it is the first part of the very first step is like, stop drinking. Right? And you're like, oh my God, now what? Then every other subsequent step is just this journey inward of getting to know who you are and changing your behaviors and finally connecting to the world around you.
Okay, so I'm going to ask a question, and this maybe doesn't connect, and that'd be okay if it
Sure.
doesn't. But so that journey inside, we talked about the subconscious a little bit. Subconscious is something is very interesting to me. That journey inside, is that perhaps the journey into connecting, at least on some level, with the subconscious, moving something from the subconscious to the conscious, doing something with it, realizing I don't need this and throwing it away. And that is the process by which that addiction breaks and stops the hold over you.
Ooh, I love it, man. Yeah. The holistic change model, which is a model I would like to say I uncovered. It already existed in 12-step recovery program. I merely gave it a therapeutic name and tools we can work with. But in this holistic change model, it starts off with just identifying the problem. You understand you have a problem with this issue, yes or no. And we move right into narrative therapy. It's where we explore, the story of you. And we look at it together, and we look at it in different ways, and we process it and put it away in a way that you can own it. And that's where you begin to fall in love with you again. You begin to have empathy for yourself. You begin to care about yourself. And it's amazing how much easier it is to do the next right thing when you give a shit about you. Like if you're doing a diet, you're going to the gym. I mean, and the example I use is this. Like if you have a small child in your life, like maybe one of your kids or a niece or nephew that you absolutely love, and they ask you for some cake, like some birthday cake, and they want it so bad, and you give them a piece to make them happy, and they're beaming in their eyes, and you're just happy to make them happy, and they love you. And when they finish the cake, they want another one, and they're begging you, and you love them, and you love to make them happy again, but out of love, you say no, because you know it's going to hurt them, and you're denying them pleasure out of love. Well, once you give a shit about you, when you fall in love with yourself again, it's so much easier to deny yourself that piece of cake out of love. And that has a lot more traction in your recovery than if you don't give a shit about you. If you don't care, you're like, fuck it, I'm going to drink, because you beat yourself up so much in your life. You don't deserve to be here anyway. Why am I even bothering? It's such a harder road to change your behaviors when you don't care than it is if you do.
Well, and I think what that does too is that forces people to think about why, like their motivation behind whatever it is that they're doing. And if they don't have a very strong why, if it's not connected to who they are, their core values, then it doesn't matter, because like you said, they don't care about themselves.
That's exactly right. Yes. Yeah. Oh,
now,
hit the nail right on the head, man.
Yeah. Okay. So now there's a little bit of an irony between, I think, being a high performer while still going down that spiral. What do you think about those forces make that such a dangerous paradox?
Oh, and this is for me was why I see such a high suicide rate in the military, why we see these high performers hide so much for so long, and they don't seek help until everything is blown up. For me, it came down to that same spirit going into BUD/S training. I'm not going to quit no matter what. That willpower. I am laser focused. That works in denial. I don't have a problem. I can figure this out. It's not that bad yet. I've been through worse. That same self-talk working to keep me going in my addiction is also stopping me from hitting a bottom. Like I'm finding a way. I need to rob a bank. That's what I need to do. I need to figure this out no matter what. That keeps you sick. The harder, the smarter you are, all these things that keep this denial in check, that I don't have a problem. I can figure this out. I don't need help. Those blinders are so reinforced by a lifetime of being able to be successful at whatever you tried to do. Why should this be any different? that keeps you in that it's almost like on the rails of addiction. You're not getting off until it hits some kind of dramatic conclusion. Yeah, you have no choice.
Right. And I guess, okay, so with that kind of self-talk, to me, that's where things like affirmations come in. And I think that's, and affirmations, listen, I truly think affirmations are helpful and beneficial, but one part of me really sees the data that says yes, like you can see there's a positive side to doing an affirmation. You stand in front of the mirror, you say I am whatever it is, and it's a powerful statement. You do that over and over again. It's like reprogramming your subconscious. But on some level of my subconscious or my conscious thinks there's no way that works. There's no way that that's actually beneficial. But I see the data that says that it is. And so like those things, I think, coupled with NLP, which is neuro-linguistic programming, that's all self-talk. And if you can shift that internal dialogue to be a cheerleader for yourself, as opposed to somebody that's consistently cutting you down, then your internal dialogue changes from like a horror movie to a success movie.
What you're saying is right in line with what I'm seeing out in the field. And it's that constant daily affirmations, and they come in all sorts. It's almost like in the beginning, and say in a 12-step recovery, or someone in some sort of recovery, they go to a meeting and they have to raise their hand and say, I'm an alcoholic, and my name is Tony, I'm an alcoholic. And they do this over and over and over again until not only they embrace it, their subconscious realizes, okay, they are an alcoholic. There's this buy-in, and you start, you're embedded in a program of gratitude. And you look at your gratitude list. These are things I'm grateful for. I'm learning to live in gratitude. You begin to discover that gratitude is an action word. If my wife makes dinner, I can express gratitude by doing the dishes and cleaning up the kitchen. You learn that these things are, and all of that's like a reprogram. And at first you don't have 100% buy-in. It requires you following the direction of a mentor or a sponsor. It requires you letting go of what you think you know about yourself, because I have been programmed to live my life by my rules and my reinforcements, and that got me in rehab.
Well, and I think what that does is it forces you to change your own perception, because our perception is our reality, and what you're talking about right there is, I think, is that shift to something else besides what you have previously seen yourself as.
And it's the harder charger you are, the more you are ingrained of just go, go, go. I will figure this out. To let go of that sense of control of your life and like take suggestions from someone else, and to get the buy-in, it's difficult, and that's why when they talk about hitting bottom, it has to be a bottom that's hard enough that you can press off of. It needs to be a one where you say, all right, my way did not work. You seem like you know what you're doing. You figured it out. Whatever you do, I'm going to follow, and it's you have to grab onto that, even if it doesn't make sense, and take their suggestions. And that's hard for someone who's just so questioning and so, no, that's not going to work for me. I have to let go of what I think I know about myself. It's a humbling, it's a realignment, it's really, and I've seen some high performers out there who are really good at the mentor-mentee process quickly grab this concept, and they do well in recovery because they can instantly go, okay, I see this process. I need to follow someone who knows better, and they learn quickly. So I see people who can navigate this. I was not one of those. I was one that I had to hit hard, and out of desperation, I'd be willing to take whatever suggestions they got out of it. Because just as I hated who I became, and I desperately wanted change.
Well, okay, you were just there talking about hitting rock bottom, hitting a bottom hard enough that you can push off of, and that's what a profound way to say that, because that is like yes, you have a photo that you keep from your lowest point.
I do.
How do you use that to be your anchor, and share a little bit about that photo?
Okay. Well, you have to realize that I was a Navy SEAL, and I'm just built and rough. At my peak, I was 220, my fighting weight, and I look pretty mean, 6'2", 220. And through my addiction, and my addiction progressed through alcoholism, coke, ecstasy, finally landed in crystal meth, and crystal meth does a number on you. And taking these contracts overseas, going back and forth, the wear and tear, I ended up weighing 130 pounds.
Hold on, I want
That's
to pause for a
90
second.
pounds.
You were addicted and doing all of those drugs while you were going overseas to do these things.
Yes,
Wow.
yes,
Okay. Okay.
yeah. So it was, you're making in contracting, you make, $1,000 a day in country, doing what needs to be done over there, coming back over here with a bunch of money, partying your ass off, and it's repeat. So it's a very destructive cycle back and forth, war zone, stateside craziness. And so my health bars, if I were a video game, were going, dee, 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 dee. It came to a point where, I went to take another contract and they looked at me and they go, Dice, no, get your shit together. And I got turned down. And that's hard on an ego. I didn't take it well. And instead of thinking something was wrong with me, I just went harder into my addiction. So this progressed further. And this photo I have was 2 weeks before I hit bottom. Of a picture of me and my son. And I looked like a skeleton who's just, and I have it framed on my desk because I need to never forget that guy. That's still an option that remains for me. I can have that again if I want. I don't want to forget. That's why I changed everything. And the moment I realized, it was not when I got turned down from a contract. It wasn't people saying you're in trouble, you need help. It wasn't any of that because I was not listening. I had my blinders on. It took me to a point where, remember the first pandemic we had, the H1N1, the swine flu pandemic?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I was on a 3-day bender, meaning I had not been asleep for 3 days on crystal meth, just using. There's phone call came and I let it go to voicemail because you never answer the phone when you're that spun up. And then the message said, this is the daycare center. There's been an exposure to one of our technicians. We're having all the parents come pick up their kids. Please come down, pick up your son. And I was like, oh my God, well, maybe my wife will get him, and the voicemail comes in and it's my wife saying she's out of the area. I have to get him. So now I'm getting ready, trying to get out of this room, and I'm using and trying to get ready. I'm going to get in a little bit. I'm going to go in a little bit. And the phone's ringing, and messages are coming in. I'm trying to get out. For 3 hours, I'm trying to get out of this room. And I'm using and just one more hit. And I'm realizing I can't get out of this room. I remember turning off my phone, pushing it under the bed, and just using. My whole life I had trained to be a hero. Everything I'd done in my life was to be there when needed. And here my son needed me, and I could not get out of this room. Because Chris, that's when I knew this is what I was. I was an addict. I was going to die from this disease. I stopped looking in the mirror. It was like my spirit broke. I've never thought I'd be here. That was my bottom. That was me giving up hope. Yeah. And I knew addiction had me. Hands down. I was a drug addict. And you think that would be okay, stop. No. That wasn't the stopping. That was just me realizing it had me.
Okay, that was gonna be my question. Like, what were the next steps for you after that? Like, that was the lowest point for you, and you knew it. What do you do next from there?
And it's funny. You see addicts and alcoholics who know they're an alcoholic for a long time. They just say, "Okay, fuck it, I'll just keep drinking, using," and they, depending on their level of productivity, they'll just continue in this place, knowing and accepting they're an alcoholic. So I was in this for a while, and I was using harder and harder. It's a lot of self-hate. I couldn't look in the mirror. And there came a point on another bender where I was up all night, and there was these 2 young kids at 3 a.m. I don't know what they're doing up so late. And they were running around the house with these airsoft guns, shooting little plastic pellets at each other, and they were just, it was annoying. I was already angry. So I got away from them, and I remember passing out on the floor upstairs. And one of the kids was kicking me in the leg, aiming the gun at me, saying, hey, freak, hey, freak. And I roll over and I look up at this kid. I look past the gun up into his eyes. And he was like, 10, 11 years old. And I look at his kid's eyes, and they were like, I remember, like shark eyes. Like there's no innocence left in this kid's eye. He's seen too much crazy shit in his life. He didn't look like a little kid. And I realized in that moment that my son, this is what's going to happen to him. My dad died of the disease. I'm going to die of this disease. And this is what's going to happen to my son. And that, whatever that was, made me get up. And I went down to the kitchen, Chris. And back then, this is like 2010, we didn't have the internet, but we had the internet in book form. We had the yellow pages. And I pulled out a yellow pages and I flicked through it and found a treatment center and randomly chose one and called it. And they had a bed. And I was 9 hours late getting there, but I was the beginning of me knowing something had to change. Otherwise, this system was going to continue for another generation. That was when I reached out, that moment.
And because of your past, the experience that you've had with your dad and being able to see that kid, that was the thing that made the change for you.
That was the connecting. And I was like, and it was, I mean, it's like you don't go 100% initially. It was like 51% of me knew I had to change. 49% of me was like, oh, I don't want to. Like, it was a several-hour drive to the treatment center. And in the Hampton Roads that day, there was a tornado warning. And I remember looking out the window going, I hope the tornado hits. Then I don't have to go. You know, this just, or reaching in the seats looking for one extra tab of ecstasy or something. Just, you know, trying to grab onto the addiction in some way. You know, it was a crazy being pulled, but knowing I had to still go.
Now, in rehab, something changed for you. What you talked about the therapist that came in with coffee.
Yes.
What was it about that? Or maybe there was something else that changed for you, that moment that hope took over for you?
No, right off the bat in the treatment center, this was a 12-step based treatment center, and I did not like 12-step people. It looked like a cult to me. I saw my parents try it out and, you know, not do well. And I didn't like their whole approach to anything. But I realized in treatment that this is a 12-step facility. And I was like, oh, geez. And so like day 3 comes by and all the adults, all the therapists sound like Charlie Brown's parents, like wah, 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 wah. And I'm not really listening. And I'm looking out the window. I'm sitting in this chair in this little treatment circle. And I'm looking out the window, kind of spacing out. And I remember, you know, those little Viewmaster kaleidoscope things where you pull a little lever and your little click goes. I mean, it felt like my world went click. And I just kind of said, fuck it. Maybe this will work. Like just this little bit of I'm fucked to maybe. And I remember sitting up and looking at the therapist, and the therapist looks at me and he goes, holy shit, where did you come from? And he said this was the first time in 3 days that I made eye contact with him. And I kind of wanted to be there. There was like a little bit of hope. Maybe I don't be that guy. Maybe I will change. Maybe something different will happen. And I began to, I shared a little bit. And the irony of this is like, you know, that was day 3. Day 4 comes by. Day 5, day 6 comes. And there's a knock on the door. And it's the insurance people saying, your insurance is deemed you're ready to transfer out of treatment. And I lost my shit, Chris. I was so angry because I finally wanted to be there and they're going to make me leave. And I was going to punch someone in the face and I was screaming at them and losing control. And they're trying to calm me down. And I knew if I left here, I was going to relapse. I desperately wanted this. And they said, well, if you have $9,000, you can stay. And I was like, who the fuck has $9,000 in rehab? You don't come here with a bunch of money. You know, you enter rehab on a winning streak. You know, I was so angry with them. And so, you know, they had me calling people asking for borrow money and no one would lend money to me. And so I had this idea. I said to my therapist, can you give me a 4-hour pass? And he gave me, and he says, well, wait a minute, where are you going? Because he was really worried I was going to rob a bank or something. You know, he was like, he knew what kind of person I was. And he was like, what are you going to do? I still had my car and I took it down to CarMax and I sold it. And they gave me a check that was enough to cover the $9,000. And I looked at the check, Chris, and this thought crossed my mind. I don't have to go back. I mean, this is a good run. I already thought about the hotel room I'd go to, the people I'd call. I mean, but if it wasn't for that moment of like looking out the window and that little shift that maybe I held on to that and I went back to that treatment center. I didn't even go to the bank. I didn't even want to trust myself with cash. I just went back to them and signed the back of the check and endorsed it over to them and they took it. And then I was all in. whatever they said, I was in the front row doing. I was listening. I wanted it so bad. And I had put all my chips in the middle of the poker table and said, I'm all in. Let's go. I was a desperate man who wanted to change.
All right. A couple questions on that. You talked about that vision kind of clicking in. What do you think that was? What do you think that was?
That shift
Yeah.
it was
Like, I guess, okay, so
it,
let me kind of preframe this a little bit.
sure.
Like, if you can, for you, maybe it's different for everybody, but if you can think about for you, what was that change? What allowed everything to shift into place? Was it the detox wearing off, or were the drugs wearing off, or was it already outside of that? Was it something clicked in your subconscious that brought it up? Because like if you could figure out what that is, then you could have that click for
Mhm.
so many other people. And so
Well,
like I guess what was it that you think that did that for you?
there's a in recovery circles, there's a moment, there's a word for it, and they call it a moment of clarity. There's this perspective shift takes place, and you go from, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired to, whoa, this is a way out. So there's this acceptance, there's this opening up. And part of the first part of a recovery program is, admitting there's a problem, believing in a solution, and then being willing to take suggestions. That little framework, and that can all happen at one time, where there's this shift of, okay, I'm letting go of what I think I know. I'm accepting my fate. I'm here, and I'm not going to resist change. I'm becoming open. So this click was me. I think it was me, like, I'm going to stop fighting you.
Hmm.
It was letting down my guard, and this kind of encaptures how far I had let down. One of the therapists there at the treatment center, one of the therapists who told me, says, when you were very little, you never learned how to self-soothe. What I want you to do is go down to Walmart, and for the rest of the time while you're in treatment, I want you to buy a teddy bear and carry it around with you 24/7. And I looked at this therapist and said, I'm a fucking Navy SEAL. Yeah. But if you think it's going to make me stay sober, I went down to Walmart. I bought this black teddy bear, about yay big. And I gave him a skull and crossbone armband so he looked kind of tough. And I walked around treatment 24/7 carrying a teddy bear with me everywhere I went, because somebody told me it would help me stay sober. And I was willing to do anything. I mean, I truly was. I drank the Kool-Aid. I was what I 100%. If you say this, I don't understand it, but I'm going to do it. That's where I was at, and that is that place where I let go of what I think I know what's best for myself, and I'm willing to take new programming.
Well, okay, so it's talking about shifting perspectives. Now you help to guide those who served.
Yeah.
Okay, so with that, what is unique about treating, and of course you're a veteran, so but what's unique about treating a veteran, first responder, or law enforcement personnel?
Well, I did my dissertation on this. I looked at what interventions work best with the veteran population, and by far, by leaps and bounds, the group environment, the group process works with veterans, first responders, law enforcement, and people in the group who are of similar, station in life. You're all a group of law enforcement, a group of veterans. There is this sense of, when I share, no matter what someone's told me about me, like someone said that has been telling you your whole life, like, you drink too much, you drink too much, you drink too much. I can not listen to you. I have it built in defense mechanism. But when I see someone who's looks like me, who operates the same, talk about their drinking patterns and how they hit it and what they did, if I'm looking at that person and go, wow, I had the same drinking patterns. I did the same things, hiding it. I'm just like that. So they're seeing themselves in this group, and they're able to say, wow, I really do have a problem. Or I am manipulative when I talk. And they learn about themselves so clearly and quickly in this group process that, their wife could have been telling them all these things for the last 10 years and they never heard it. But in one group process, they can learn these things about them and believe it. That sinks in quickly, and it's not, and it makes sense when you look at it, like, oh, of course that would work. But in practice, it's amazing to watch it unfold,
It's
having
like,
that buy-in.
well, it's like
Yeah.
that group reflects what they're seeing and feeling on the inside. And when they see that reflect on other people, then they can kind of take hold of it and say, yeah, I can see that in me as well. I can see
Mhm.
this as well. And then they can open up to share. And then other people in the group have that same type of reflective type of understanding.
Yeah. And seeing that it's not just the drinking, it's not just the substance abuse, it's not just the gambling, it's also what it does to your the way in which you manipulate the conversations, the way in which you're hiding and having secrets from the family, the way in which it's affecting your kids when you're not really present. You've never been written up at work does not mean you don't have problems at work. Your 80% probably satisfies the minimum required at work, but you could be given 100% and being the stellar employee. You're actually depriving work of your 100%.
Mm.
So all of those things become into focus, and realizing that this addiction, which you've been using to keep all the parts in place, has actually been holding you back. And that, the purpose of recovery is not get you back to where you were, it's to get you fucking to break through and thrive. And the way I like to describe it to people is that to be an active alcoholic or an active addict, it's like wearing a weight vest. You've been training with this weight vest of addiction your whole life. And the minute you figure out how to get this off, you realize that you're super creative. You're super dog-headed. You have all these superpowers you honed in addiction that can propel you further in life, because you've taken on this weight vest and now you finally shed it. Think how high you can actually jump.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, okay.
It's
Now that kind of brings into the thought to what success is. And
mhm.
now, on the side that you're on now, for you, what does success look like? And why, let's see, so why could success be more fragile than what people think it is?
I think success for me is finding a balance in my life. You have to have all the tables of the leg equally supporting the weight of the table, and the table is actually quite light if all the supports are in place. And so, and if there is ever any storms or traumas going on, the other legs can bear the weight while that storm resolves. And so, this sense of balance is something that you look for in recovery, and it's one that I love tackling the problem head on and going full force. And my guidelines to my kids are, when you go to a new job, find out what they expect, find out how can you wow them, and then find out what's the record. It's that overachieve mentality going in. Having a mentor or a guide or someone I could talk to on the regular to kind of keep me from going too far, to keep me in the realms of what's legal, the realms of what's in balance, that kind of bouncing ideas off someone is huge, and all the amazing high performers out there, they all have someone in their corner they talk to. They don't let the ideas just sit in their head, because I tend to get super tunnel vision and focused in. So I have a mentor now, I have a sponsor, and I have people I talk to that kind of keep me from going overboard in these different areas of my life. And it's it's funny that after a while you get so accustomed to this process that they're almost just a sounding board. Me saying things out loud becomes enough for me to realize, oh yeah, I know what I'm supposed to do. And it just becomes that self check, and your life gets into this nice little framework. And the part that I got to remember is that I can't let that magic recipe go just because everything's working smoothly. So I have to continue to practice those standard things, like talking to someone regularly, still using my mentor, still talking to my sponsor, still I still use a therapist. I still, all these things, that magic portion that worked in early recovery throughout my 15 years are still in use today, because it keeps the balance in balance.
Well, okay, Tony, for listeners who are striving for mastery, how could they avoid being addicted to that success and instead build something meaningful?
Gotcha. All right. So, addicted to success. I want to put this little PSA moment out there. If you are a hard charger, and if you are a functioning alcoholic and a functioning addict, and you're out there changing the world, and you're hitting all the marks, and you're out there just rocking it, there is nothing I can say to you today that you're going to hear, because you're in the zone. You're hitting it, you know, until there's some kind of chaos in your life, until there's some structure fires or something's going on, you're there's not going to be even an inkling or a desire to seek help, you know. So to you, I almost like say, hey, rock on. Know if you're ever hurting, there's people that you can talk to. You know, you be you. You go out and change the world. And when the chaos begins to erupt, and there is trouble at home, you know, and not are those pings under the hood, you know, what I can say is, in your pursuit of mastery or conquest or, you know, achieving your vision, that don't be alone. There's always everyone out there always has a mentor, a buddy, someone in your circle. You need to have that daily, you know, accountability, someone you can talk to on the phone and reach out and be honest with. That is the key to mastery. And everyone who's truly on that cutting edge of getting better has that mentor. You know, you gotta have that. And that's the part that I think a lot of the high performers who crash and burn leave that out. Or the flaw in that mentor mentee program is there's a lack of authentic honesty and talk about what you're going through. You know, you can't do this alone. You really can't. The secrets keep you sick. That's a common thing you hear in recovery. You know? And that is so easy to fall into, this thought that if you really knew me, you wouldn't like me. And if everyone thinks that, then no one knows anyone.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Tony, I want to say thank you. Thank you for sharing your journey with us. And what it shows that chasing excellence without self-awareness can lead to that inner collapse. You know, we heard how success is addictive. It isn't clear, but it is reality. We also saw that, you know, your recovery has purpose, and service to others can help to transform and bring you into into a better space. Your darkest moment can become a map for others to lead in light. Now, Dr. Tony, I want to say thank you again. And, you know, before we wrap up here, are there any key thoughts or final takeaways you would like to leave the listeners with? And if they would like to get in contact with you, where would be the best way for them to do that?
Sure. Let me leave you with this. You know, I saw an interview with Steven Spielberg, and I think he was talking to another big director, and he shared this, that, you know, you can argue facts all day long, and you'll never never really change someone's perspective or outlook on life. But if you tell them a story, if you share a story with them, that is what changes people's outlooks and perspectives on life. The book I wrote, you know, After the Trident, a Navy SEAL's journey through shame, addiction, and shame, is a story of, you know, a high performer who had battled these inner demons, and the outcome and an aftermath. And it's written in such a way that you can be engaged, and you may identify in, you may not, but in that journey, there might be this awareness that, whoa, I'm on the same trajectory. I'm feeling some of these same things. There's this awareness piece that you may be able to grip into. And I hope that you don't go where I went and blow everything up. You know, there are various bottoms you could hit. I'm hoping you hit one that's not as expensive as losing everything. So this book I wrote, and you can at drdicebook.com, you know, that's where you can get on, find more information, where you can get the book, first releases, and all of that. Know that you're not alone. You know, it's just a peek into someone else's life that may turn into something, a realization about your own journey.
Okay, well, very good. Thank you. And listeners, I want to say thanks for listening. And if Dr. Dice's insight resonated with you, share it with somebody who you think is chasing victory at all cost. And of course, follow our show, join our newsletter for more mental armor and mindset fuel. Keep battling gravity with grace. Until next time,